Good afternoon. Welcome to the Shareholder Committee meeting on Monday, the 22nd of November at 4:30. We have a fairly packed agenda with a number of people who are running slightly late, so there may be the odd disturbance every so often. So, in no particular order, I'd like to welcome Councillor de Gorn and also Councillor Kilbane. We've also got Dan Moynihan and Patrick Looker and Louise Cook around the table. So, agenda item 1, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Excellent. Agenda item 2, the minutes of the meeting. They're acceptable with one small change.
Yes, just to note on page 4, there was written representation from Lars Cram in relation to the committee's remit seeking commitments for all the council's companies and respective actions on the climate emergency. And from memory, we did actually agree that that should be requested of member companies for future reports. So just to note that, I don't know quite what the process was, because it was just a speaker, it wasn't actually on the agenda, but you know, we were in agreement that that should be something we ask companies to report on.
So I'm happy to have conversations with each of the company and we can put something in place for the next time. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 3, exclusion of press and public. We are hoping not to go to salmon papers. So the questions that Councillor de Gorn and myself have are all based on the white papers, so that if we need to, we will, but we will try and not go to the exclusion of press and public. Okay. Agenda item number 4, public participation. There is one public participant. Gwen, would you like to come and sit down? You know the format. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. It's now 6.5 years since Floyd caused the 2015 Public Interest Report. This committee was one result. Under this administration, you are taking it more seriously, but there is zero transparency in these reports. Whilst clearly some information is confidential, there is much that could be published, such as annual reports, trends, etc. We need some public assurance that these businesses are viable and giving us a return. If not, why not? I am asking that for your future meetings, a standard format report be required with required appendices, including companies' house materials for all our shareholdings. A public report and discussion should be held for each shareholding before you kick us out. This should be codified in the Constitution, in my view, to give us assurance. I raise this as we shovel tens of millions of pounds through these TCAL companies with almost zero oversight of the company or services provided. I raise this as councils all over the country are failing because of mismanagement and lack of oversight of their TCAL companies, also all behind closed doors. In addition to upgraded, standardised, twice-yearly reporting here, Chair, I would seek your assurance to instigate proper democratic oversight of these companies across the authority. By that I mean at least an annual scrutiny of each company, reports to include from CYC staff and member directors, an annual report to appropriate executive, and a combined annual report on the finance and governance of all our shareholdings to Audit and Governance Committee. I raise this here so you too can share the burden and seek additional assurance from officers and other members. Had we been consulted on the Constitution, Chair, I would have asked for this shareholding oversight framework to be installed as an article or an appendix, but we citizens have been excluded on your rewrite of your rule book. Chair, I have written to you separately on 2 particular issues of concern. Firstly, the inadequacy of the Municipal Bond Agency report in view of its precarious position, well recorded in the public, but not here. More concerningly, the continuing complete absence of reporting on York Science Park Limited and its so-called private Stafford director. Finally, Chair, by these small changes, we could for once be an exemplar authority in terms of governance of our TCAL companies, a belated but fitting response to the first public interest report. Thank you, Chair. I'll send you these comments.
Many thanks, Gwen. Your comments are noted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies, I'm shuffling lots of bits of paper. Okay, so the next agenda item, Sandy, would you like to come to the table to discuss your waste? God, if you're warm enough to take your jacket off, you've got thicker blood than me.
Modern technology. Didn't realise I had to have an IT induction as well. There we go. Just to sort of pick up on some of Gwen's comments there, in terms of annual reports, they are of course publicly available, but I do think it's perfectly reasonable and rational to ask that we include them in a future set of appendices. Obviously you don't want them in every one, but when they are made published at the accounts, it would be perfectly happy to do that. And I will make sure that there's a copy of the latest public accounts or annual accounts for Yorwaste in the next update to the board, if you're happy with that, Chair. In terms of oversight, whilst I can't talk to the wider sort of CYC ones, obviously we've got oversight from City of York. We've also got oversight from North Yorkshire. They do run differently and they do have different sort of requirements, but underpinning all of them is the fact that we provide a lot of information to the officers and to the board, which have representatives from the sort of councillors on it, which should hopefully give some comfort that we're not heading off a cliff. But I also understand that perhaps in terms of the public perception of that, particularly when we've seen some of the failures in other authorities, there's possibly a need to sort of think about how we might do that. And I'm sure and we will take the lead from anything that you require, which we think we can support to get that message across. We would be happy to do so. I'd like to apologise, I didn't put in the update in the, I only saw it in the agenda, and as usual, I see the agenda just before after I've put the report in. You asked about apprentices. So we do have apprentice, we are making use of the apprentice levy, not in its entirety, but a significant portion of it, but we don't have typical apprenticeships. And I think we've looked at it, and I don't think the roles that we would typically hire for lend themselves to apprenticeship roles in the traditional sense. We do have a couple of, now let me get this right, is it quick kickstart? We have some kickstart employees going through the process, and I think that's been valuable for them and for us as a company. It's been quite interesting to watch them develop as well within the roles. And we strongly support that programme. And we will continue to sort of maximise the use of the apprenticeship levy going forward. We are also investing in drivers. So not only, we're not relying on the external market to provide them, but we're growing our own. So someone can join as a sort of, household waste operative, and then sort of eventually, after they've been with us for a few years and demonstrated their credentials, we'd be quite happy to support for them to go through into HGV training, which is a significant investment, but is worth it for the right employees. And then in terms of attracting women, and you'll know that I'm quite a keen supporter of women in waste. We sort of set up a work group a few years ago to encourage that, where we have a women in waste work group. Try saying that with the teeth in. And I think, to be fair, it's sort of gone quiet over COVID due to the inability for them to meet. But they sort of got together again at the recent breast cancer awareness event, where we raised over £1,000 across the company, but also at York on Hazel Court on that specific day. We will use the phrase peopled the site exclusively with our sort of female employees. They get a lot out of that. The public sort of then could hopefully start to sort of see that waste is a role that's perfectly sort of open to women. We certainly don't discriminate in any way, shape or form. We can't actively promote, because that would also be equally illegal. But we are, I think what that comes through in our stats, because the industry average for waste is about 17%. We're at 18.5%. And I've said that without sort of creating an unbalanced recruitment process, it would be nice if we could get to 25% over the next couple of years. So that's an aspiration rather than a target, because the target could end up with the wrong outputs as we're trying to do it. Hold on 1 second. There we go. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Even my apologies are, there we go. I'm just going to my report now.
Technology always does this. It's
Yeah,
great when it works.
every single
and the moment
time.
that it doesn't, this is what happens. But just building on what you've said there, Sandy, I was at the, whoa.
Fantastic cost saving initiative,
It
Patrick.
is,
Well
you know,
done.
we're
Yeah.
taking sustainability to the nth degree.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. Is that all right? Is it because we're not moving, or is it? I was at the James Street site this morning, and Lorna was showing me around, and she is a fabulous asset
Absolutely. Yeah.
for your company, along with, I turned up at the Breast Cancer Day, and I thought that was done superbly well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So onto the report. I mean, I repeat that first section about the shareholder value because I think it's important to make sure that everyone, you know, people coming to the company code probably really understand that it's not just about how much we make in profit. It's about the charge that we make for the actual services that we provide to the council. It's also about the fact that we sort of underpin some of the council's commitments in terms of its volumes into Arlington Park, which generate a return for the council via that business stream. And I think sort of what we've got to do is try and balance it all. So we want to be tax efficient. We want to be tax compliant. We certainly do not want to evade tax, but we can certainly sort of make sure that things are done correctly to the benefit of the shareholder within all the legal guidelines on that area. In terms of our performance, it's happy to sort of say that the sort of first half we're ahead of where we were in terms of where we were ahead of budget at the midpoint, and I think we are comfortable that come the full year we will probably still be able to be ahead of the actual budget. However, we're probably not going to make the return that we made last year. Last year, we were able to, if I use the phrase, mine the non-effective, which meant that you didn't need to cover people when they were on holiday because we were all on lockdown, etc. That allowed us to sort of offset some of the costs, and we went through quite a lot of cost savings last year as well. Some of those were temporary in nature, specifically in relation to delaying maintenance and repairs on certain bits of equipment. That was only ever going to be a short stopgap whilst we worked out what was going to happen in the future. I think we're none the wiser about what's going to happen in the future, but we now need to get back on as if things were back to normal. And as a result, we've had to resort and return to our normal sort of planned preventive maintenance, which is one of the reasons why over the last few years we've been able to deliver real-term cost savings in our equipment budget, because we've reduced the number of plant that we've got, because we've got better kit that's more reliable, that's being looked after better. And I think sort of in terms of the current year challenge, the biggest challenge we had at the start of the year was the driver shortage, which I believe many people have had. We had chats about the impact that was having on things like bottle bank collection. And I think we just by the skin of our teeth got through it, primarily because we had managers and some of our sort of back office staff who've got HGV license actually doing the odd shift. That's the only way we were able to do it. That wasn't sustainable in the long term. We had a review. We recognised that our sort of salary was significantly below the market benchmark, and also below the sort of the comparable cost to employment of the councils. And we sort of increased our sort of salary to our drivers. That stemmed the outbound loss and actually helped us recruit some new people. So we are very close to our actual establishment headcount, which has allowed us to sort of effectively return to full services on the sort of transportation side of the business. Wider, there seems to be still a bit of a sort of tightness in the employment market, and every roles from sort of from planners all the way through to some sort of account staff are actually proving not impossible, but more difficult to recruit. And we're finding it's taking longer to secure the right person, because you can get someone, go through the whole process, make them an offer, and by the time they've come back, they've found another job, and you have to almost start the process from scratch again. And we're seeing that probably more frequently than we've ever done previously. So I think the market as a whole is tight, and probably will continue to be so, certainly for the foreseeable future at the moment. Health and safety, we're still performing well on health and safety, although we've started to creep back up. And I think that's primarily as we're now handling waste, we're now sort of almost back to normal. You'd expect a little bit of a sort of reversal of the downward trend. Having said that, we've wanting to make sure that it doesn't go up to its previous levels, and we've put in place some additional training at all levels in the business in order to be able to sort of stem that as it's going forward. We've also got an aspiration to sort of go for what's called the British Safety Council 5-star audit. So we have that in as a target. Hopefully it will be delivered by probably about the summer of next year, all things being correct. But we've still got a little bit of work on our side to make sure that there's a few areas that we've identified that aren't quite as good as they need to be. Nothing that's critical in terms of, you know, we're not missing guardings or not giving people PPE, but there's some things in terms of documentation, some things in terms of processes that could definitely be tightened up, and we're getting on with that at the moment with some external consultancy expertise. In terms of environment and change, climate change, we're going for ISO 50001, which is the first step, because you won't know what you're going to be able to save and what you're going to be able to do about it until you fully understand what your current footprint is. So we're going through that. We should have that certification early next calendar year, so end of the current fiscal year. And then that will then drive the longer term plan out from that one. We've got the very first trial of a sort of car drive van or van drive car electric version, which we've got on a trial for a few periods just to sort of see whether that works for our staff, because towards the end of next year, our main fleet for our supervisors, operational managers and supervisors needs replaced. So the question is whether we extend that fleet for a year or two because the technology is not quite there yet, or whether we actually think, you know, if we prove it and get comfortable that it can do the job, then we might transition to that towards the end of next year. And the big challenge is the ability of our staff to charge it at home. So if they're living in, you know, sort of terraced housing, they can't really have a electric cable going across if they're parking on the street. And similarly, one of the other challenges that we got was because of the footprint we've got, they could be doing, you know, quite a few miles in a particular day, depending on the needs of the business. So we need to make sure that we can sort of cover those scenarios off.
Can I just jump in there? We're having very similar conversations within the council. So it might be useful to talk to Dave Atkinson, because he's got a whole strategy built around that and how we're making that shift and also making it available to all of the staff, regardless of what type of house they do or they don't live in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But certainly, I'm aware that there's no resistance from the staff, who all seem to be quite keen to get their hands on an electric cars. Partly, they're very fast off the mark, is what I've been told, although we shouldn't be encouraging that kind of behaviour. In terms of our sort of full year estimate, as I've said, I think we're going to be ahead of budget, but not necessarily as high as last year. And that's been buoyed by a couple of things. One is the landfill gas has been, the prices have been through the roof. So whilst it's been a pain on the energy side of it, it's been a salve on the revenue from that landfill gas. We've also performed better than we expected on the commercial side of the business. We retained pretty much almost all our customers throughout the whole COVID period. So we started the year effectively where we started the prior year in terms of customers. And I think what we're seeing is probably a slightly reduced turnover in customers, partly due to the goodwill that we generated from that, but also I think partly there's many people out there who've got bigger things on their mind at the moment in terms of getting their business running, rather than worrying too much about sort of changing their waste suppliers. So I think that will, as we move back towards normal, if we can remember whatever that was, I think we'll start to sort of see a little bit more mobility in that. But at the moment, the market is still a little bit sort of static. I expect that to sort of unwind over the next 6 months to a year. In terms of our actual operational costs, they are pretty much bang on budget. I mean, to within less than 1% on a year-to-date basis. So the costs are kept under control. And then in terms of our forward costs for next year, there's quite a lot of inflationary pressure, but we think that we can still keep that within a sort of reasonable control when you look at when you flatten out the last few years. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we've got a good handle on our costs across the patch. Obviously, one of the big challenges for next year is the abolition of red diesel duty-free, which will sort of hit all of the plant that we've got in our waste transfer stations. There's also some issues in terms of the supply chain and specifically the global chip shortage is impacting everything, including major sources of plant. So one of the things we're in the process of doing now is doing a review of everything that we've got going forward, trying to identify plant that we can eke an extra year or two out of, trying to identify where we can maybe bring forward the purchase of plant, knowing that it's got a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month lead time on certain bits of kit. So that's one of the additional challenges that we've got for next year. But I think overall, in terms of the second half of the year, the challenge on commercial sales, because we had an accelerating budget throughout the year and then we've got a static market, that will perhaps sort of start to stop giving us a positive. I don't think we'll drop into a negative on the full year, but that will balance out some of the upside in the front year. Thereafter, where we've sort of got some revenue from gas, that will be sort of balanced out by some of the increases in costs that we've got for things like the drivers going in terms of the salary increase that we've had for them. So overall, I think in the full year will be positive to budget, but not as positive as last year. So business plan, we're still in the process of finalising it. We are almost there. There's 1 or 2 outstanding points that we need some input from the shareholders on. Once we've got that done, that will be concluded and we'll go to our board and the shareholders in December, which then allows them to feed it into their plan for the following year. And then I think in terms of going forward, the government resource and waste strategy consultation is sort of largely concluded. I think we could probably spend more time than we've got allotted here to go into the wheres and whereats of those. There are some good points in the strategy. There are some questionable logic in the strategy. It has yet to manifest itself all the way through to a final destination and a final conclusive. Suggestions would put a burden on the sort of taxpayer that really, at this particular time in our economic cycle, wouldn't be welcome. But there's also the question about the speed of which they're actually going with that. It does seem to be taking a bit longer. So I think we'll just need to see where the actual chips land on that. Yorwaste, in line with the wider waste, industry as a whole, we are effectively working on a static business, no change, primarily because nobody would want to go and invest in new sorting equipment if we don't know what it is that we're actually going to sort. There's an added complication whereby even if they come out and say, here's how we're going to stream the separation of the materials going forward, right? You could say we're going to set, but in 5 years' time, because of the extended producer responsibility, those plastics might not even be there. So you could build a plant to sort plastics and then find that you've got no plastics to sort. I'm using a little bit of hyperbole to sort of demonstrate the story, but that uncertainty will sort of put a dampener on the investment until the government provides clarity on exactly what it plans to do with that. But overall, I think the company's doing well. We're in a strong position to sort of do what's ever required out of it. And I think we'll continue to sort of take a steer from both our authority clients and our shareholder owners in terms of what it is that they need. And then we'll try to match that with what the market can provide.
Okay, Sandy, many thanks for that. And the performance that has been pulled in over the last year has been really, really good. The health and safety is improving, the retention of staff is improving, the attraction of staff is improving, the recycling rate, last time I looked at it, was over 51%. So all of that work is going really, really well. So thank you for that. I've got a couple of questions, if I may. First question I've got is, could you just take, I know that you've been reviewing your procurement processes. Could you just take me through what you've been doing and how you've been going about that?
So, try pressing at once. So we're obviously subject to the same local authority guidelines as the council is, and sort of we follow those. We make sure that where there's any declaration, well, we make sure we've got declarations of interest to make sure that somebody's not giving contracts to their mates. We've got various levels that require various levels of scrutiny and sign off within the company. I think what we've done is we've recognised that sometimes you can go through the procurement process and miss something. Anyone can do it, and it's never done with malice or intent, but what we need to do is be able to make sure that we learn from that. So what we've done, and it arose from a specific contract that had a lot of people who were showing an interest in it. And my concern is that with so many people showing an interest, you've got a risk of challenge and more people who sort of think, oh, I've got the best idea. Why didn't you pick me? You need to show in that instance that you followed the fair process. So what we did is we got an independent review of the whole procurement process to identify anything that we could have done better, could be brought to challenge on, and rooms for improvement. And the reality is that we couldn't be challenged on anything, but there were certainly rooms that we could continue to improve in the process. What we've done is we've done that process, I think, 3 times now since we started it. And now what we're looking to do is that projects over a certain limit will automatically be audited independently to make sure that the process was followed, it was fair, it was transparent, and it achieved the correct outcome for the shareholder. The other thing that we're looking to do in addition to that is you can go through all the process and identify the right contractor. And one of the things we found is you've gone to all that trouble, you get the right contractor, you go to sign the contract, and what Yorwaste hadn't done, which the council don't think has the same problem, is that it didn't always go for a legal review of the contract terms. So we've never had any hurlers, but there's a few things where we probably sort of gone, we could have done that better. So now contracts above a certain value will need to automatically, there'll be the light touch review and then there'll be the detailed review depending on the value of the contract. And what we're going to do is align those with delegation of authorities, take that to the board for approval. At the lower level, where we're talking about items of £5,000 or less, we need to still make sure that we get value for money, but we also need to be a bit pragmatic about that, because there's certain circumstances whereby you can have someone who says they're very, very cheap, but they never turn up on time. In fact, they don't turn up until 3 weeks later, which sometimes actually ends up costing you more, depending on what the problem is. So what we need to do is we need to sort of get that process properly documented, give greater clarity and greater guidance to the managers who are involved in doing that end of the process, make sure that that's also got tied off in terms of the declaration of interest to make sure nobody's sort of giving it to their mate or their neighbour. And then we formalise that in terms of additional training for that section of the sort of procurement process. That's more of a training issue rather than doing anything different, just so that we've got consistency across the company, and we can also make sure that we avoid the transfer to come around and go, well, I didn't know that's what we were supposed to do. So that I think was that. Yeah.
That is excellent, and thank you ever so much, because it's a good process to go through to make sure that everything is transparent and open. And my final question to you before I ask Councillor de Bourn, because he's bound to have questions, is I know that you're looking at feasibility studies in the Green Park, in the Energy Park, whichever way I'm supposed to call it. Do you have any dates or timings for that?
So we've agreed that with the local LEP. It will be complete by the end of the current fiscal year, so by the end of March. We will seek to sort of deal with some of the stakeholders like Sean Gibbons prior to that, to make sure that we don't sort of turn up and say this is the answer and then we get lots of questions. We're trying.
This is going to get quite entertaining.
So yes, so we will throughout the process try and take key stakeholders on what the sort of key outcomes of it are. I think one of the things we need to recognise, or one of the early findings, is whenever you export solar or wind power to the grid, you don't necessarily make a profit on those units. You make a profit when you use it. You get your best return for when you use it on site. So if you're going to talk about that and you're talking about the sort of scale of investment, then the question is what's your offtake going to be? And Yorwaste itself has a limited offtake, so therefore there's a discussion about what the wider requirements of the council would be, which almost straight away puts your timescale into the sort of 3 to 5 year point. So that's the first thing. We are looking at solar and wind, and the wind would be, I think, is it 200 or 300 metres tall? So as Councillor Waller reminded me, York Minster's only 87 metres tall, but that will be something that we'll need to happen down the road. I'm not touching that one with the barge pole, but all I'm sort of saying here is that if you want to achieve certain things, that's one of the things we need to consider. There is a good opportunity for going for hydrification, making hydrogen, we'll call it that, where you use the power to produce it. One of your issues there then is you want to get the maximum out of your hydrogen plant, which means you would run it during the day using your solar, and then you would draw down on the grid at night to use grid power to maximise your hydrogen production. If you did that, how many kilograms of hydrogen would that produce? And then what type of vehicles could that be used to power, and what would be its equivalent for the current sort of diesel price? So we're looking at all of those sort of aspects. Battery power isn't looking attractive primarily due to the cost of storage, the limitations of the storage, and the fact that you will then have to replace the batteries over a period of time. But these are all just very high level initial sort of thoughts, which we now need to dig into more detail.
That's looking towards the end of the fiscal year, you were saying? So
This fiscal year, so by the end of
Perfect.
March 2022.
And you've already got Sean heavily involved in that area?
Sean's working with us, as is the lovely Mr. Collins, Nicholas Collins. So,
and I think the university are interested as well.
They're also sort of they're on the sidelines. They're not part of the core group, but they've expressed, well, they've identified that they've got some skills in that area, and they're prepared to offer them in terms of helping develop the case and developing other alternatives for how we can sort of maximise the use for the shareholder, for the client, and for the wider community in terms of that Harewood Win resource. Because I do see it as a resource. It's a great site. Yes, it's got lots of rubbish underneath it, but we've covered that up, and it's a great location to sort of do some good environmental sort of development on there. So
absolutely. I don't have any further questions, Councillor de Gunn.
Yeah, if I can just, that was going to be one of my questions, but I can expand on it a bit. I just wonder if I mean, this sounds really exciting potential. No doubt you have been talking to or looking at sort of other equivalent operations around the country. I don't know whether whether there's some network of tech companies that presumably would be looking at a similar sort of thing. Obviously, it depends on what resource you've got in terms of landfill site.
There is a landfill site. Place escapes me. Somewhere near Oxford, but not Oxford, and off that main motorway between Bath and London, and I believe they've got landfill sites, and our sort of aftercare manager's been down. He's walked around the sites. He's talked to the local management. We have some sort of contact with them. The agency the consultants that are providing support to us on this task as well are also looking at something similar. Can't remember the area exactly, but once again, it's down south. Everything's down south, and they're sort of looking into that and coming up with some sort of benchmarks about how we can do it. I'm aware of some local ones that are pending on a sort of private perspective rather than a sort of local authority perspective. And I think we just need to be aware as well that and the current state of the grid can only support so much renewable energy at so many grid points. So whilst we might come up with a fantastic plan to do it, if we take too long, somebody might sort of get in there first, and then we might need to wait for the grid to develop to the point where it can actually then take our investment.
But then you mentioned about producing green hydrogen on site, which is obviously an excellent way of using that energy.
There is a slight challenge on that one, Councillor, whereby, and this I've insisted that this is included in the report. Please don't quote me on this, but indicatively, if I remember the graphic correctly, if you go straight from solar and straight into your end use vehicle, you're talking about 10% loss in the transition. If you go via hydrogen production, that could be as much as 60% loss or even more, depending on the technology that's lost. Now, I don't know if that ultimately proves to be worth it or not. And that's one of the reasons why we're going through the feasibility study. But there is a challenge whereby every time you convert energy from one mean to another, you lose some of that effectiveness.
So I'm just going to jump in there. That's a very good conversation to have with David Atkinson and Andrew Ledbetter. Andrew Ledbetter's taken me through that conversation, and effectively, depending on how you do it, when you do it, what you're using it for, it could be a good or a poor idea.
Mm.
So that's why you're doing the feasibility study, and that's why you've got to take all the various different areas into account.
Yeah.
But absolutely.
Yeah.
I think York is relatively tight, so a solution that works for York might not work for North Yorkshire. Where if you're now taking your vehicles up the steep bend that takes you out towards Scarborough, what's it called? Big Hill? Steep upward.
I know what you mean.
Was it? Sutton,
Bank.
yeah. If you're going up,
I had the, what's the name, hold.
oh,
in
you
my
can,
head.
see that I'm not a local,
Yes.
right? But if you're going up Sutton Hill, right, and that takes a big strain on an electric motor, which itself is going to be heavy.
Mm.
If you're doing it with hydrogen, right, in theory, the torque, if you're using hydrogen, it's a burn rather than hydrogen converted to electric to then sort of power
I
it.
am going to close this conversation down because I think this is far too detailed for the business plan that we're going into here, and will come out through the feasibility study. But very good questions and things that we do need, areas that we do need to cover and get the detail to, because you're dead right. Depending, you know, that's why hydrogen works in Aberdeen, but it may not work in a tight geography, etc. So we just need to be mindful of what is required for our services.
One of the things just on that, Chair, is I'm trying to make sure that in the specification of the report and the work that the consultants are doing, that we try and give everybody as much information as possible, because what is quite clear is, depending on whether you're a skeptic or sort of or an evangelist, you can find any email, any sort of website out there to support your case. What we're trying to do is to sort of make sure that we don't just tell one side of the story, we tell both. But tell them from a point of fact, so that the shareholder will be able to make its decisions. It can challenge them, it can go and seek, you know, alternative views, but we're trying to sort of be very even-handed about this, because what we don't want to do is to invest in a Betamax when actually the VHS is just round the corner.
Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, the other point I was going to make was on your paragraph about looking forward, and obviously the government plans. I mean, obviously, it's difficult until you know the outcome of the consultations and recommendations, but are you sort of working on plan A, plan B type of scenarios?
We've got
this, then we'll do this, and if that, then we'll go that way.
Councillor, we have a veritable alphabet of plans in terms of how we can respond to possible scenarios. I think the problem is that the scenarios are largely going to be medium term in terms of their outcome. So let's just take the deposit return scheme, for example. The glass industry has, you know, we're recycling somewhere in the region of about 73% of our glass bottles and jars. They're seeing a risk whereby if you now start to go to DRS and you treat them all the same way, and you add that to extended producer responsibility, you could end up with a rather perverse situation where it's better to put wine in a plastic bottle in terms of your cost of moving it because it's heavy, right? And in terms of your cost of producing it, which would be a lot less, and in terms of your cost recycling, which cost your DRS, which will be the same as a glass bottle. And whilst we don't know what the final documentation is, there's a lot of uncertainty, which means I wouldn't want to bet on any outcome at this moment. I would probably think that whatever does come out is probably going to have some suboptimal decisions in there that will then need to be unpicked as time moves on. So
you're obviously thinking about it. So.
And I would have, you are thinking about it. I know you've got a plethora of plans, and we just have to wait until the government decides which side of the fence it's going to jump.
Yep, absolutely.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, am I excused? You're excused. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item, could I ask Ashley and Sarah from Make It York, please, to come to the table? Do you know about pressing the button for the mic? So if you wish to speak, you need to press the little button that's got MIC underneath it. Thank you. Okay, welcome. I don't know which one of you wishes to speak first. So if you want to take us through your plans of the paper that are on here, we're trying to ensure that we don't need to go to any of the salmon papers. So all the questions from myself and Councillor de Gorn are from the white papers. Okay.
Okay, we haven't really been given any instruction on what you wanted us to say today, because I thought I was coming to answer some questions.
Okay, you should have been given an agenda that had a variety of different questions on it. So about apprenticeships. Have you received anything from us? No. Okay, so we'll take it as read that we've read the papers.
Sorry, Chair, shall I just introduce the covering report? Obviously, apologies from Charlie Croft, who can't be here this evening. The covering report updates members on a number of issues. Firstly, that the inward investment team and economic support teams transferred to CYC in September. This has resulted in a reduced contract price that the council will be paying to Make It York, referenced in paragraph 8. Should be noted that there will be an adjustment made in this financial year to reflect the period that Make It York were paying for the staff. But in a full year, the council will pay, the amount that the council will pay Make It York reduces from 324k to £112,000. In terms of the trading update, the company is performing broadly in line with projections. However, Make It York continues to have challenges. It is forecasting a loss this year. The company has requested council support with regard timings where the market and the VIC, Visitor Information Centre, were forced to be closed, and the staffing of the barriers as part of the Christmas markets. And really worth introducing the new managing director of Make It York. Only started last week, which is possibly why bit of it. Sarah Loftus, as well as Ashley Young, the senior marketing and communications manager. Hopefully we'll be able to advise in terms of how the business is moving forward.
So our apologies for that. I hadn't realised you'd only started that recently, Sarah. Wow, well, welcome. Okay. We've read the white papers and I've had conversations with Charlie and conversations with Patrick. There's a couple of errors in the papers. It's been confirmed to me that they will all be fine, and that when you see the PDF versus the normal one, the PDF got transcribed somehow to the way that ours were described. I've also checked some of the commercial numbers because the numbers that Patrick just read out then change as you go through the papers. Again, it's been confirmed that the number on point 8 on page, whatever it was, page 14 is the correct one. So that's the correct number that's there. I've got a couple of observations and a couple of questions, okay? So the observation I've got is that last year, Make It York were given close to £800,000 from the council due to the pandemic, due to the circumstances, which we understood. From that, you also paid for a variety of different things. So one of the areas that you paid for last year was the hostile vehicle measures. And therefore this year, the council is paying for the hostile vehicle measures. So I understand where the £80,000 ask comes from. The other 20,000 is for the shutting of the Shambles Market and also support for the visitor centre. We don't have the authority to say yes or no to that. So yes, I agree for that to go to the exec committee for us to discuss it and see if that's a sensible use of the money. Okay. The next point I'd like to make is Annex A is quite lengthy, and Annex A actually goes through, for want of a better term, your constitution. Again, I think that needs a real robust look at, and I want to send that to exec so that it is looked at piece by piece and taken into account to make sure that I haven't missed anything and that Councillor de Gorn hasn't missed anything. I think it needs more than 2 sets of eyes on it, if I'm honest. Yeah, so that's the second thing. Third point I'd like to make is you heard me ask Yorwaste about procurement procedures. Could you tell me about the procurement procedures inside of Make It York? Because I hear different stories in different ways and I'm nervous.
My understanding is that we are pulling together at the moment a procurement policy I'll give you a little bit of brief background about myself. I've worked in a local authority, I've worked for charities and non-profit organisations. So in most of the organisations that I've worked, I've followed a public sector procurement process and especially a process for ERDF funding, which is very strict as well. So at the moment, we are pulling together proper procedures to be able to present, I think at the March meeting, it's my understanding that has a very clear financial procedures for the staff to follow and for procurement as well.
Okay, can we review them, please? Can I see them before the March meeting? The reason that I'd like to see them is that I want to make sure I can say to the residents or the members of the Shamble Market or anybody else across the UK, you are being treated in exactly the same way as anybody else that is looking to take on whatever event it is that you're looking to take on. So if I could see them sooner rather than later, I'd be really grateful. Is that okay?
Absolutely fine.
And then at some point, and I know Andy will have some questions on this, but what I would like to, I don't know whether I get it minuted, tabled, I always use the wrong phraseology. I would like to set up a conversation with Make It York about single-use plastics across all of our events, and also about energy supply across all of the activities, such as how do we work together to remove any single-use plastics, and how do we work together to remove diesel generators, etc., across the city. So if we could have that within the next month or two, I would be grateful.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Okay. There were my questions, Councillor de Gaulle.
That actually reminds me of one other point. Certainly, obviously, the single-use plastics and waste is a key issue. I appreciate you're one step removed from the generation. We've obviously got the Christmas market at the moment, but there was a social media post of a picture of one of our bins overflowing with disposable cups. And obviously, you know, it's too late now to impact on contracts for Christmas markets, but that certainly would be something I think we should, if we haven't already looked at, that should be something about incentivising stallholders to encourage reusable cups. I know that that's been a challenge in itself during COVID, but nevertheless, hopefully, to move away from disposables, because that also impacts on our waste collection and the ability we have to when it's really busy in the run up to Christmas, to keep emptying those. So that was one point which you reminded me of.
Just to build on that, during the next few weeks, we are going to have a weekend more or less double the amount of people that are in town in order to service what is happening. It is fantastic that it's busy. It's fantastic that everybody feels safe. It's great that people are spending money. How do we do, what is the next best step? You will have your ideas and I will have my ideas, but I don't know what exactly will work. I've seen different things in different places. We've all got our own ideas, but we need to make sure it works for ourselves here. Ashley?
Yeah, just one comment on the sustainability agenda. I guess that's front and centre really at our Visit York Tourism Conference in January. We have Visit Glasgow speaking about their sustainability journey, and it's also going to form a central part of the tourism strategy that we're looking at for York in the new year.
Fantastic. Can I be involved in that, please?
Absolutely, yeah.
Brilliant, because the more we can get it integrated, instead of somebody thinking they sprinkle the sustainability dust on the top, the better we'll all work it. Thank you.
No problem at all.
Councillor Dawn, any further questions?
And well, another point to note, sort of a general one, as was mentioned about the sort of arrangements with hostile vehicle measures and so on. Communications is really important. The sort of communication between the council, Make It York, stallholders, market traders, those sorts of things. We do try and need to make sure that that works as smoothly as possible. And then just looking at the papers, I was going to say that I assume we're looking at items 6 and 7, are we, at the moment? Yes. So on item 7, as has been indicated. I agree with, I was going to raise it myself anyhow, with Councillor Widdowson, that the articles were put in place by the executive, and so to amend those, they need to go back to the full executive, in terms of process. And at the same time, if there are other aspects that need to be looked at, then there's the opportunity for the whole executive to consider that. But appreciate the work that's gone into this.
So we are very supportive. We do want Make It York to work. It's in everybody's interest to make it work. We've got to do it in a very open and transparent manner and make sure that whoever has the responsibility and accountability for making it happen, makes it happen, and that we work together. Sarah?
Absolutely pleased to hear that. I think we're moving in the right direction. I know that we're providing quarterly reports. I'm ploughing my way through all the information and the service level agreements so we can provide you with the right statistics and the information you need, and also that we can promote that in the wider York, because I've heard the noise, and I think quite rightly we need to be more transparent and open.
Okay, many thanks for that. I have no further questions. Councillor Gorn, any further comments? No? Fantastic. Thank you ever so much. We'll see you before another 3 months. And if you need anything from ourselves, please, Sarah, get in touch.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks. Should have brought my blanket. Okay, on to agenda item 8. So, Karen, I always feel like saying, would you like to take the hot seat? But, certainly nothing warm in this room at the moment. So, Karen and Claire, so it isn't Patrick talking to this one. I haven't got it the wrong way around, have I? So as you heard me say earlier, the idea is to keep all the questions and everything on the white paper so that we do everything publicly. Okay, so over to yourselves.
Thank you. It's just by way of introduction, really. Karen and the head of HR regularly meet. I'm interim head of HR for a whole month, which has been good. And our new head of HR starts next Monday, Helen Whiting, and the meetings are in the diary already with Karen going forward. So that constant conversation will continue. And I think you last had Karen in front of you with Trudy in September. So this evening is around giving you that further update as to where the financial and performance position is. Thanks.
Okay. I'd like to say as well, first of all, that unfortunately I didn't have an agenda with your questions. So if you want to give me an idea.
Just one second there. Who takes the actions for that so that we know that the agendas are actually sent out? Because I know there were 4 points on the agenda that we'd asked everybody to look at. So if you, I don't know where or who, should we take that out outside the meeting? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But they'll have been stuck somewhere. There's no panic. It was just about, I was asking about procurement procedures, apprenticeships, health and safety, and even I can't remember the fourth. Okay. Okay.
So sorry, it's around apprenticeships, health and safety, procurement, and
I can't remember. I would love to make something up. What shall I say? What we're having for dinner?
tell me if there's anything else you
Don't worry. But what I do want to get a flavour of is the business. I only have one question for you at the end of this. So just a flavour of the business and how it's working.
Yeah, flavour of the business. Okay. Very busy. Since September, continuing to be very busy, both with the City of York, with schools in particular, and some of our commercial clients as well. The challenge, as for everybody at the moment, is recruiting, and as that's our business, it's a daily, minute-by-minute challenge. We are finding that we're having to negotiate with CYC about rates, and also with some of our commercial clients about pay rates. It's definitely a candidate market, and when we're looking for specialist staff who have local authority experience to basically parachute in and immediately start doing the job, then we're finding that rates for those staff are higher than they have been previously, and CYC are having to pay that accordingly. We have had a number of very specialist roles through recently, which we have filled, details of which are in the unmentionable papers. And we're finding as well with school staff in particular that as fast as we can recruit somebody, we are sending them out. They're working as many hours as they possibly can. We've had a number of different recruitment events and attended other ones. Limited success at some of those. We went to a hospitality event a couple of weeks ago. I think we had 2 candidates. We did an education event here. I think we had 4. Of those 4, they were pretty good for, so we were quite happy, but ordinarily we'd have expected more than that. And we've been to a couple of externally run jobs fairs. The first of those was very busy. Second was very quiet. So it's a challenging market at the moment. We've also had some changes with our own staffing. We have managed to recruit people to replace the people that have left. So recruiters have managed to recruit, which is quite reassuring in a way. And I will just say, as well as my regular meetings with the head of HR, we do a monthly report to CYC, which details all of the stuff that we're providing, a breakdown of all the rates that they're being charged. And as our services directly to City of York Council, then CYC managers are very, very well aware of the situation.
Yeah, and we see those statistics, and also I know that they're fed in through Ian Cunningham, so they go into the
Absolutely.
transparent data machine that does whatever it does.
Yeah.
KPI machine. So yes, so thank you for that.
Okay. That's about it in terms of what I can tell you that isn't confidential and market sensitive.
The comment I've got, and I don't know where this fits in because I understand that you're at recruitment. You know, I'm not stupid. I do know that you make your money by doing the recruitment, and I do know that York Council makes its money by you doing the recruitment. When you look at some of the statistics, it feels a little bit like we're on a merry-go-round. We get somebody in, they work for us for a while, they then go somewhere else, personal circumstances, whatever reason. What would you suggest between us we need to do to retain people? Because we seem to have, in certain areas, not lots of areas, but in certain areas, we seem to have a bit of a merry-go-round going on. And what I'd be interested in is, we've spent the time, resources, expertise, training people, getting them in the right place, and then we lose them. So between us, what do we need to do? And it's not just pay them more, because we can't.
Yeah. We are not doing your permanent recruitment. We are only doing your temporary recruitment, and your temporary recruitment generally is 3 to 6 months. So if people leave after 3 to 6 months, that is what the original anticipation was. Right. Now we do have people that started 3 to 6 months and were there 2 years later.
And we're not converting them to become permanent.
Sometimes, yeah, large numbers of staff have gone permanent. I was talking to some guys in IT earlier on, and I said, one of them said, oh yeah, we used to work. I said, yes, so did your colleague, so did your colleague, so did your colleague. So quite a lot of people move into permanent roles, but often the intention is only, we need this person on an interim basis because somebody's left or is on maternity leave or is sick, and we will be permanently recruiting for that role. Now, sometimes that permanent recruitment takes the time. Sometimes it's put on hold. Sometimes there's a service review coming up, so it's extended. The temporary person is extended. It's rare that we put in a temp who doesn't last the original duration of the assignment that was set out. It's more common that that person stays longer than the original assignment was intended for reasons that permanent recruitment hasn't happened yet.
And is there anything you can think of that we could put in place between ourselves, maybe our neighbours, that would create a more stable pool? So that I know that we're recruiting for temps, but sometimes the person that they've, exactly as you've said, sometimes the position that they're going into is extended for longer because the other person doesn't come back for whatever reason. And sometimes they choose to stay or move somewhere else inside of the council. So is there anything that you see from your side of the table that we could be doing?
I mean, we have a lot of temps who are on our books, who've been on our books for many, many years, who move from one assignment to the other around CYC. We also have people who've worked for CYC, who we put into other local authorities, who come back to CYC. And that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to have a sustainable offer to our staff. We don't want them to go and work for 3 months and then be looking for work. We want to keep them working. I guess the main issue we have with CYC is the time that it takes to make a decision. But it's a local authority, so we understand that. We're a recruitment agency, we can act very quickly. You know, the processes that CYC have in place in order to approve an assignment for a temporary member of staff are more streamlined than they used to be, but still take some time. So we'll get a call from a manager on a Monday to say, right, we've got this really urgent role coming in. And it will sometimes take 2 weeks for them to get authorization for that role to be filled, by which time it's very, very urgent. And the number of people that are available might have diminished. So I guess my advice to CYC is to be more speedy, to make a decision. And then if they are going to recruit a permanent member of staff, to crack on and do that as fast as they can.
No, well, that makes sense, and that means we can go back and look at our processes as well as how they fit into yours. Can I ask that you have that conversation with the acting head of HR?
Absolutely. I mean, we have that conversation all the time, and that's why we changed the last process, because that didn't work for CYC and it didn't work for us either.
And the sign-off process now is sufficiently slimmed down, but with the to speed it up, but needs to have the right signatures on, particularly if we're making decisions to pay over a certain amount per day. So those discussions sometimes take a few days, so the right people speak to one another.
It's sometimes CYC managers not being aware of the process as well. We're having to educate them and go, it's not our form, it's your form. This is the form you need.
We can do some more work about that.
Yeah, there's some comms that need to happen, I think, and we're doing that as well.
So that's fixable, so that's good. So that's good to hear.
We know it can work. Just getting people to get the right signatures at the right time.
Yeah.
So that was my only question. Councillor Gunn?
That's fine.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
So we're on to agenda item 9. Could I ask Max and Dan to go into the warm chairs, please? Oh, sorry, Dan, you've got your own chair, haven't you? So again, Max, you've heard the way that everybody else has been doing this. So Dan, do you introduce it or is it straight to Max? Because I've already made that error once with Patrick.
Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, I also didn't receive the, but I can try and answer them as best I can.
It's okay if you just talk to the paper that you've given us, and we'll worry about how we get the agenda items out in time that everybody sees them next time. Don't concern yourself with that, Max. So just talk about this.
Thank you. So it has been a successful year so far. It continues to be going well. In terms of the financials, we are on track to achieve the target profit for the year. There are no significant variances against the budgets. Since the last meeting of the committee, we've continued to bid for contracts when they've come up, and we've also had a number of pieces of work recommended to us, or people have approached us based on recommendations. I think you've heard it from others, but recruitment and retention continues to be a challenge for us. We are trying to manage that. It does, in effect, place a limit on what we can do. We are getting to the point where it would probably be too risky to take on further work, because there's no guarantee that we'd actually be able to deliver that service. So we're having to sort of balance the opportunities against that risk. We are continuing to offer services to schools, both in York, North Yorkshire and further afield, and to broaden the offer that we provide to schools. And in doing that, we've developed 2 new services, so one on risk management and one on a whistleblowing service for schools. And I suppose the only other highlight since the last meeting is that we've had a Investors in People external review, and that was successful, and we've managed to retain our accreditation. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. It's good news about the Investors in People, and it's a cracking year. You've done, you know, when you look at what you've achieved over the last 12 months, it is a really, really good position to be in. I'm going to ask the same question that I asked last time. So given that we've had the local government review, and that we are going to go from 9 councils down to 1 in North Yorkshire, how does that affect your business going forward?
Okay, so we currently provide services to 6 of the councils. So there's effectively Harrogate and Craven are not clients currently. In the run-up to the vesting day, we actually expect the volume of work to increase because of the work, the services that we provide. We think there will be a need for additional work, and certainly we're already seeing that we're being involved in working groups and trying to facilitate the sort of transfer to the new authority. So in the run-up to April 2023, we see actually more demand for our services. Once the new council is established and operating, it's going to take some considerable time to sort of streamline and go through the process of merging services and systems. So again, for a few years after April 2023, again, we expect there to be an increased demand for our services. So certainly for the next 4 or 5 years, we do not see any particular risk to our business. After that, clearly we're getting further, you know, it's
if you can see 4 or 5 years ahead, that's fantastic, because I can probably only see 4 or 5 months ahead at the moment in the various different ways that we're planning things, depending on what central government decides to or not decides to do. But that makes sense then. So you see it as an opportunity over the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Absolutely. And even then, you know, our main mitigation is to continue to develop and expand the business, which we're able to do. So I don't really see any particular threat or risk to the business.
Okay, I don't have any more questions. Councillor de Gaulle?
Just congratulations on the Investors in People. I'm sure that has been of benefit to the employees. I don't know if you've had any particular feedback from having been through these processes myself. I know that you always have to find some areas for improvement. Is that something that you've identified, some areas that will be taken forward?
Well, as you know, there's always a few areas where they highlight things we could do better or differently. So there is an action plan. There was nothing in that action plan that was, to be honest, particularly surprising. It did focus on needing to continue to look at engagement and communications, particularly as we're working in a more sort of agile way with a lot of people still working at home. So that is a focus for us, but it's no great surprise, to be honest.
Get the button to work. Many thanks. See you in a few months' time. Okay. So we're on to item number 10. Simon? So this is your procurement organisation, or YPO. Now, Patrick, do you lead on this one?
It's really, obviously, to welcome Simon, who goes through all this. It's really, there's a number of annexes to the report which picks up questions that you had in the last shareholder committee where we didn't have a representative from YPO. So it's really over to Simon to go through this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, there we go. Yes, so my apologies actually for missing the last committee. I was actually down with COVID at the time at fairly short notice.
I'm assuming you're clear now.
I am, yes, thank you. Fully recovered, thank you. Yes, this was some months ago. Thank you. So yes, in the reports that we've submitted, we have the Joint Committee Financial Outturn, which is the public sector body of which York is one of 13 members. Then there's the limited company, which is again, York is a 1/13 shareholder in that trading business. And then yes, picking up the couple of questions that were asked last time, we've got an update on EdTech Impact, which is our online learning business that we are a 30% shareholder in, and then specifically on the current challenges on supplies to schools. And I've got some thoughts. I think there was a specific question around how York could help us in that regard, and yes, I do have some thoughts on that. So taking those in turn, the Joint Committee finances, just as a reminder, we have a calendar financial year. So 2020 for us was, a very serious financial loss, bearing in mind our main business is the sale of resources to schools, and schools were closed for a large part of 2020, but all the fixed costs remained largely the same. We did take advantage of the furlough scheme to the extent that we were able to, but it clearly didn't compensate totally. So the Joint Committee made a decision that they would not pay a dividend to members in 2020. We very specifically, therefore, highlighted 21 as a year of recovery, getting back to trading performance, getting back to producing a surplus, and then distributing that in the normal way back to schools and to local authorities, to our 13 members. Of course, we then came back after Christmas to the unexpected lockdown, so we did have another quarter of the year essentially taken out of our revenue stream, again with the fixed costs, which has hit us. But I'm pleased to say that from Easter onwards, we've got back to the kind of the normal run rate. So we based this year's budget on the 2019 run rate. We're back there. We have a summer peak. Summer is our Christmas, when all schools is essentially buy the large orders ready for the new school year, and that happened this year. We weren't sure that it would in the normal way, but yes, it did, which has been very helpful. We're seeing a bit of a mix, so consumables are selling well. You get things like traditionally, particularly in primary schools, a lot of the pens, markers, and so on would have been shared resources in the centre of the table that all pupils would use. Actually, that's kind of forbidden now with social distancing. So every individual pupil has to have their own individual pack. So we've had to kind of switch our own internal operation to kit building, making up individual packs for students and for pupils. So there's been quite a lot of adaptation that we've had to do to our product range and the way in which we deliver goods through this year, just to meet the new requirements from schools. I am pleased to say we will make a trading surplus this year, of about 2/3 of the level that we achieved in 2019. And as a result of that, we will be paying a dividend. As a reminder, of the total surplus that is distributable, 20% goes directly back to schools as vouchers, and the 80% back to our member authorities. So everything is recycled into the public purse. I've described there the education resources trading business. Of course, there's the other part of the business, which is the procurement, public contract procurement business. And that has been very steady, actually, and has performed well through this year. We are finding that heads of procurement in all our member authorities have a large pipeline of procurements to carry out. They've been very restricted in doing that. There's a lot of catch up to do, and we're a resource that's providing very useful to them. So there's been a bit of an opportunity for us, to be honest. There's also very much a dearth of qualified procurement professionals, not just across the public sector, but across industry generally. And again, we are very lucky in that we have very good staff retention. So we've kept our core of procurement professionals, and they're being, as I say, used very widely at the moment by our member authorities. We are finding that cash is squeezed at the moment, more so than we ever have done. So keeping an eye on cash is very much a high priority for us. That's a result of two things, really. Obviously, making a loss last year starved us of cash resources that we would normally have. But also, you'll have read about the kind of the global supply chain challenges. So making sure that we are focusing on stock availability, but also price stability. So we're seeing a shortage of goods, but also they're going up in price. And one of the answers to that is to forward buy as much as you can, make sure that you've got the goods in stock and that you can buy at today's price and safeguard that for the future. That eats up cash by doing that. So we're at the minute walking a bit of a tightrope between making sure we've got, let's say, kind of stock availability, price availability, but enough cash to keep the business going. And it's a challenge that frankly we haven't experienced in a long time, but bringing some new disciplines to the finance team. And I suppose the final challenge that we've faced through this year is the productivity impact of social distancing. So if you imagine picking goods in a warehouse environment whilst maintaining mask wearing and social distancing, it's all just that much slower. So productivity is down. I suppose the upside of that for the local economy is we're employing more people. So we've taken on temps to be able to do that. We've kept full employment throughout, which and lower than national average COVID rates as a result of the measures that we've taken, which is something we're very proud of, really. So that's the joint committee. The limited company, and again, just as a reminder, this is not really a business in its own right. It is a transaction mechanism for dealing with those parts of the public sector that fall outside the local government goods and services act. So that is individuals, teachers very often buy products themselves. Nursery settings, early years particularly, largely are private businesses nowadays. Care homes largely are private businesses. They're providing a public service, but they fall outside the Local Government Goods and Services Act, and therefore the limited company is a mechanism by which we can continue to supply that sector. And it's been hit by very much the same story that I've just described. Has the same calendar financial year, suffered from the same lockdown effect. The size of this business is dramatically different. So 115 million roughly on average over a year for the joint committee trading business. This is a £1.5 million business. So making in the kind of tens of thousands of surplus rather than the millions that we're talking about in the other business. So it is not intended to maximise either turnover or profit there. It's more opportunistic, and we will feed business through one of the two channels depending on what is appropriate. The next one then is EdTech Impact. So about 4 years ago now, we took a view that online learning is very much on the increase. If you kind of horizon scan, then that's going to start to cannibalize a lot of our very traditional physical resource that we're selling in terms of pens, pencils, exercise books, that kind of thing. So very much as a protective move and a kind of a long-term investment, we took 30% shareholding in EdTech Impact, which was an established but fairly small startup business. It's a slow burn, that investment. And I think one of the things that we as a public body are able to do is take that longer term view of investment. A venture capitalist might not go near it, actually. We're wanting to make sure that we're in the provision of online learning from day one, that we have that as part of our portfolio, and we're prepared to support that for some time to come. Growth has been slow and not helped again by lockdown. You might think that the business would be actually helped by what's gone on, and certainly the concept of online learning and edtech particularly has very much been boosted. But a lot of companies are providing services free of charge through that period of time to support education, to support the Department for Education, which if you're essentially a broker, an online broker, trying to take a percentage of sales is not a great outcome. So we have been supporting EdTech Impact. We did make them a 50,000 loan in the middle of last lockdown. That is being repaid. So they are now on the up again, trading, covering their own costs and making the loan repayments, which we're pleased to see that outcome. And I think it's starting to develop this concept of a portfolio of offerings to schools. So On our public sector frameworks, we've very traditionally done contracts for local authorities such as yourselves. Schools increasingly, as they lose the provision from a local education authority at the centre, finding that they have to look at insurance, grounds maintenance, electricity contracts for the first time. So we've developed a specific portfolio of contracts for schools. So looking at this kind of spectrum of hard products, of online learning software, of contracts to actually manage the overall school environment is very much part of the current development of YPO. One thing I would mention on EdTech Impact, we are a 30% shareholder. The founder of the business is the remaining 70% shareholder. He is looking for other co-investors at this point. Being a public body, we have, under the shareholder agreement, a veto on any other potential investors, because making sure that we are co-investing alongside an ethical investor who shares the same kind of ethos as we do in terms of providing a public service is really important. Now, that places some restrictions on the other shareholder, but he went into that with his eyes open, and we're very determined to make sure that we exercise that control that we have. And then the final point, I think there's a question from the last committee on the challenges facing YPO in terms of the future supplies to schools, and it's a very pertinent question actually, because the landscape is changing quite dramatically at the moment. Traditionally, as I say, schools have placed big summer orders, palletized deliveries. That is starting to disappear. It's not dropping off a cliff, but we're seeing a trend over the last few years that, as with the rest of the world, everybody wants smaller and smaller, more frequent orders delivered almost on a daily basis. Next day delivery is now something like 20% of our overall requirement, which means we're having to re-engineer the warehouse and some of the shift patterns to be able to accommodate that. So the answer to that is growth, because what I've just described is more expensive. More frequent, smaller deliveries are more expensive to provide than big, bulky ones. So we need to continue to grow. We are presenting to the full joint committee on Friday of this week our proposed 3-year strategy to start from 1st of January next year. So with due regard to their governance and that it is their decision as elected members, what I'm describing to you are proposals at this point. But what we want to do is continue to grow in education through acquisition. So you may remember we had a proposal last year to buy one of our biggest competitors that ended up being blocked by the Competition and Markets Authority. For that reason, that kind of big bite, I think, is not feasible going forward. But there are smaller, more targeted acquisitions that we believe that we can do, looking at specialist brands, a specialist sports brand, a specialist science brand, that will help us to grow into secondary education, particularly where that kind of buying pattern relies on the specialists rather than the more generalist primary school offering. So we very much want acquisition to be part of our tool chest going forwards. We want to invest in some kind of low levels of automation in the warehouse, where it's not really appropriate for high levels of automation. We sell everything from a pencil sharpener to a hula hoop to a snow shovel, and the standardization of that is quite difficult. But there are some things that we can do in terms of conveying and transport and building of boxes, that kind of thing. So we're looking at some low-level investments. We have to digitalize rapidly in line with the rest of the world that has, that digital progress has been accelerated dramatically over the last 18 months, and we need to catch up with that. So having a hard copy published fixed 12-month catalogue with prices held for 12 months is increasingly archaic in today's world, and therefore becoming a digital-only, online-only platform, so that we can vary prices in real time to maintain competitiveness if they need to go down, to maintain margin if supplier pricing is going up, and protect shareholders' interests, your interests as a member. So we are printing current catalogue. I'm pretty confident it'll be the last one that we do, and we will go to an online only platform from 23 onwards. In order to fund that, we are asking members to put borrowing in part of our financial strategy for the first time. So when we were looking at the potential acquisition last year, that was going to be funded by external borrowing. We have no borrowing at the moment. We have no mortgage. We own all of our own assets. And that is a strength. That is a powerful asset that is owned by members that we can leverage to make sure that we can invest in the kind of things that I've just described to do that transformation quickly, whilst maintaining dividend payments in parallel. Otherwise, that kind of gap in dividend and the payments to local authorities that is helping to fund valuable public services would disappear. So taking a more commercial view, leveraging the assets that you own to make sure that we can do, subject to a sensible business case that your own finance officers obviously would be involved in. That's going to be part of our future strategy going forward. And I think the final thing I was going to come to was, how can you help? And I think my basic message would be by shouting about the public sector for the public sector message and the proposition that is YPO. We're unique. We compete in a very aggressive commercial marketplace against purely commercial operators who are lining private shareholders' pockets and venture capital pockets. Every penny that is spent through YPO is recycled back into the public purse. And therefore, the proposition and selling that message to schools, those that are directly maintained by yourselves, or even kind of joint campaigns to put that message across, I think is a very powerful message at the moment that we could be shouting about together.
Okay, many thanks for that. Can I suggest then that we have a conversation with Claire Fole and see how we put that into action?
Sure. Yeah, it's something we've
given
done
the number of, and also the online. I don't understand all the online training, education that you do. So it'd be interesting to understand what the breadth of that is, and again to see where that could be used and where we can speak about that. So yes, if we can put that down as an action point, that would be good. I only had one question.
Sure.
First of all, comment. Good set of results given the very difficult circumstances that you're in and the breadth of offer that you have. My question is, what's going to be the impact of the PPE that you've got? Or is it going to have to be written off? Is it going to be kept in a corner? How do you see that working its way through your books?
We've taken the hit on that, so we contained that within 2020 financial year. So the loss that was reported, and going back to earlier comments in the meeting, actually, Chair, I'm very happy to put in the public domain the annual reports that are published. So that the last published set of accounts will show that the PPE write-down was fully accounted for in 2020 going forward. We still have some of it left, but we are gradually selling some of that at a dramatically written down cost, I have to say, and we've taken a hit on it. But yeah, bit by bit, we're chipping away at it.
Okay,
but financially, the effect has washed through the accounts already.
That's good to hear, and also good to hear that the public accounts will be attached to all of the papers going forward. So many thanks. Councillor de Gaulle?
No, I think that's really encouraging to hear a sort of quite detailed account of how the organisation is going, and as you say, it's worth very much reminding us of the public sector ethos and the public benefits that come from this long established organisation, but the fact that you're having to very much move with the times in terms of how things are operated. Just one sort of question arising from that was, you mentioned about the difficulties with supply chains. Do you see that sort of evolving into perhaps a slightly less variety of choice, rather than having 10 different types of pencil sharpener, you offer one or two as the most appropriate for the market? Is that something that you think might transpire?
I do. I think range review is something we're actively involved in at the moment. partly for that reason, but also because storage is not free. So our warehouse, there's almost an assumption that you've got a big warehouse and whatever you put in it costs nothing, but it's very expensive. And therefore looking at actually what are the fast movers, taking a much more commercial approach as an online retailer would do, and only holding the product that we think we can make a return on for members. I think there's huge mileage in that. I think the other issue about supply chain shortages, I think maybe a positive outcome of this is that we are starting to look at, is it appropriate to onshore again some of the the Far East sourcing that was very popular 5 years ago. And we got the financial benefit of that at the time, and we're able to pass that on to schools through pricing. We make more margin on that, and therefore we can pass that back to members through dividends. So there were benefits, but that was fine at a time that you were paying £60 for a container to come from China rather than £600 that you're currently paying. So a lot of the benefit is definitely being eroded at the moment, and looking at onshoring into Europe or into the UK is something we're actively investigating again at the moment.
I suppose the logic of that then is to make sure that the suppliers that we have already are aware and sort of gearing up for that bit increase in the local market.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the supply chain is absolutely the right word. So we deal directly with the first tier of supply, but if you chase that all the way down the chain, there are all kinds of challenges that may be coming around the corner.
Okay, thank you.
Many thanks. Comprehensive. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we now move on to item 11, which is Municipal Bonds Agency, which is over to yourself, Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. This report is provided to members as information. Pardon me. The agency is owned by the Local Government Association and 56 other local authorities, as well as the Greater Manchester Authority. Council Executive agreed to invest £40,000 in September 2014 into the agency. It's there to provide an alternative option to borrowing from the PWLB. Current rates are marginally below PWLB, which is welcome, but it's good to have an alternative there. The agency is yet to make a profit, but has now started lending more widely. CYC itself is yet to borrow from the agency, but is a consideration when borrowing is part of the Treasury Management Strategy.
Okay, so from what I understand, you've just given us the background there. Is, if we wanted to, how liquid is the £40,000 that we've invested, and is there an audit trail for all of the activities that we've taken place there since 2014?
There's certainly an audit trail from the investment of the £40,000 from the date of the executive. I've not got any details of individual activities that have come through.
I don't have any further questions on that, and I know Debbie's not available because she's away. So if we did want any further questions on that or any further details on that, we do need to go to Debbie. Councillor de Gaulle, you have a question.
Yes, just I mean, obviously seeing the report, and then nothing since then. Was there originally an expectation there'd be a regular sort of payment into that to build up the funds, or have events since then changed the nature of the fund?
My understanding was very much a sort of bring local authorities together into a group to provide an alternative to the PWLB to some extent. So if the agency requires funds to lend on to local authorities who wish to borrow, they would be dealt with through the capital market, so they wouldn't require funding from local authorities to do the borrowing. That's all done through the market.
So my understanding was, and I need to check it with Debbie, my understanding is that CYC put an investment in so that we could, if we ever needed to, access borrowing at a lower than market rate. So far, that's not been exercised, but at some point it may or may not be. Is that a fair summation of what have I got that correct?
Yeah, it is an option for us to borrow from the Municipal Bonds Agency, and depending on what the rates are at that point in time, could be slightly cheaper than PWLB. It will all depend on the length of time you want to borrow, how much you want to borrow, but it should be a consideration that we take into account. When
And
do
if we
that.
hadn't put that funding in, we couldn't do the
We
borrowing.
wouldn't be
that
able
way.
to access at that
So
rate,
that's why it was put
unfortunately.
in. Okay. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, thank you ever so much for that. So on to item number 10, the work plan, which is all the same as last time. But can we add to there that for each of the papers that we receive, that we have the publicly available P&Ls, please? Which makes everything a little bit more transparent. I'm unaware of any urgent business. Anybody else any urgent business? No? Okay, well, can I just say many thanks, and we'll call the meeting to a close.